All right, let's jump right in. Michael Jackson's life is arguably one of the most dense, complex, and ultimately tragic stories in modern history. Today, in this explainer, we're going to trace his incredible rise, his devastating fall, and unpack those lingering mysteries surrounding his death.
Okay, let's dive into this. They're going to kill me. Just let that sink in for a second. These were some of the final, haunting premonitions Jackson shared with his closest friends and family in the months right before he passed away. Think about it. He was the most famous person alive, yet he lived his final days in absolute terror. Now, to understand how he ended up in that deeply paranoid state, we really have to rewind the clock to where the whole shebang started.
Picture this: 672 square feet, 10 kids, all crammed into a tiny house in the working-class steel mill town of Gary, Indiana. Michael's father, Joe Jackson, ran the household with an incredibly strict, often brutal regime. He demanded absolute obedience and total excellence. But the actual turning point? Well, the sources tell us it all happened because his brother Tito broke a string on Joe's forbidden closet guitar. Instead of punishing them, Joe recognized the sheer talent in his boys. Just like that, the Jackson 5 was born, rehearsing day and night right there in that overcrowded living room.
And what happened next was a velocity of success that is practically unmatched in the history of entertainment. Within a single 9-month window in 1970, the Jackson 5 released 4 singles: I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There. Every single one of them hit #1. This made them the very first recording act in history to debut with 4 consecutive #1 hits. And Michael, the lead singer delivering those incredibly mature, emotionally resonant vocals, he was literally only 11 years old. Absolutely wild.
Fast forward about a decade, and we hit this staggering number: 70 million. That's the estimated global sales figure for his 1982 solo album, Thriller. To put that into perspective, no other album in history has even approached this level. With Thriller, Jackson didn't just sell records, he completely revolutionized the medium. He integrated MTV with the Billie Jean video. He won a record 8 Grammys in a single night, and he immortalized the moonwalk on live television. He passed from mere stardom into an entirely different stratosphere. But, we really have to juxtapose these massive heights with his grim physical reality. It's a tale of two extremes. On one hand, you have his brilliant financial moves, like purchasing the ATV music catalog in 1985 for $47.5 million, which actually gave him the rights to the Beatles' biggest hits. But on the flip side, starting around 1984, the physical toll became absolutely catastrophic. A devastating burn accident on the set of a Pepsi commercial introduced him to opioid painkillers. On top of that, he was dealing with lupus and vitiligo, an autoimmune condition causing severe skin depigmentation that the tabloids mocked mercilessly for decades.
Now this brings us to a permanent turning point in his public life. In August 1993, formal allegations of abuse were made by 13-year-old Jordan Chandler. The facts from the sources show a massive global media explosion and dual LAPD investigations. Jackson even submitted to a highly humiliating strip search by investigators. Yet, 2 grand juries convened and neither returned a criminal indictment. Ultimately, in January 1994, a $23 million civil settlement was reached, which was actually paid by Jackson's insurance. Jackson maintained for the rest of his life that this was just a strategic business decision to stop the media circus, not an admission of guilt. Meanwhile, his critics strongly argued that innocent men don't settle for millions.
Fast forward a decade, and history kind of repeated itself. But this time, it went all the way to a courtroom. Following a highly controversial 2003 documentary by Martin Bashir, Neverland Ranch was raided and Jackson was arrested on 14 counts of alleged crimes against a minor. We're talking about a grueling 5-month trial featuring 140 witnesses. During the proceedings, the defense methodically dismantled the prosecution's timeline and challenged the credibility of the accusers. In June 2005, a jury returned a unanimous not guilty verdict on all counts. So his legal vindication was complete. But the psychological and physical toll on Jackson, it was absolute. He left the country practically a hollowed-out man.
And by 2009, we arrive at this totally unbelievable figure: $500 million in debt. You're probably thinking, how does a man who owns $1 billion music catalog become functionally insolvent? Well, it was a mix of decades of lavish spending on his Neverland sanctuary, staggering legal fees from those 2 massive defense campaigns, keeping huge entourages, and taking out massive loans against his catalog at punishing interest rates. If he defaulted, he was going to lose the whole shebang. And it was exactly this crushing financial desperation that essentially forced his hand into a comeback tour.
And this brilliantly illustrates the horrific mismatch between expectations and reality. On paper, the This Is It tour was an absolute corporate triumph.
50 sold-out shows at London's O2 Arena, $85 million in instant ticket revenue, and a projected $450 million global tour. But the grim reality behind the scenes? It was terrifying. Executives found Jackson locked in his room, despondent, and reportedly drunk right before the press announcement. During rehearsals, he was shivering, deeply paranoid, and completely unable to remember choreography he had done literally 1,000 times. He was deteriorating right in plain sight.
So the crucial point is, who was managing his health during this absolute collapse? Enter Dr. Conrad Murray. Now, you would expect the world's biggest star to have a highly qualified, top-tier personal physician overseeing his care, right? Well, the reality was a bit different. Murray was a cardiologist, over $1 million in debt, facing eviction with absolutely zero training in anesthesiology or sleep medicine. But he was financially desperate for the $150,000 a month salary AEG Live was dangling in front of him, a salary that, crucially, depended on Jackson actually performing. It was a massive, fatal conflict of interest.
Let's walk through the truly harrowing timeline of his final 14 hours on June 25, 2009. Jackson was desperately begging for sleep. From 1:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m., Murray pumped him with an escalating cocktail of Valium, Ativan, and Versed. None of it worked. Finally, at 10:40 a.m., Murray gave him propofol, which is a heavy surgical anesthetic, in a rented bedroom with zero proper monitoring equipment. Between 11:18 a.m. and 12:05 p.m., Murray spent 47 minutes on various phone calls, while Jackson lay there totally unmonitored. 911 wasn't even called until 12:21 p.m., and reportedly that was only after Murray ordered a bodyguard to help him hide the medical vials.
Ultimately, the Los Angeles County coroner ruled the death a homicide. The official cause? Acute propofol intoxication, a lethal overdose of an intravenous surgical anesthetic administered outside a hospital setting. Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and served 2 years. The really tragic part here is that Jackson's underlying organs, notably his heart, were completely healthy. It wasn't his body that failed him. It was the people in charge of his care. And because of that stark realization, conspiracy theories immediately spread like wildfire. So, let's objectively view the first major conspiracy theory, the involvement of AEG Live. The theory suggests the promoters knowingly pushed a dying man to his limits and purposely hired a controllable, financially desperate doctor to protect their $30 million upfront investment. However, the counter-argument is pretty solid. A living, breathing Jackson touring the world would have generated upwards of $450 million. Why kill your golden goose? Ultimately, a civil jury found AEG not legally liable, ruling that while they did hire Murray, they couldn't have reasonably known he was ethically unfit.
Then, we have the catalog theory, and this is the one Jackson himself repeatedly warned people about. The theory argues that he was outright assassinated for his 50% stake in the Sony ATV catalog, which was incredibly lucrative. And honestly, after his death, Sony did end up buying the estate's share for hundreds of millions of dollars. But the counterargument relies on basic financial reality here. Jackson was so deeply in the hole that Sony likely could have acquired the catalog through his inevitable loan defaults, all without ever needing to resort to violence.
The final prominent theory centers directly on Dr. Conrad Murray himself. Was he a hired hitman? Was he selected specifically because his incompetence would ensure Jackson never actually made it to the London stage? Well, the counter-argument points straight to Murray's incredibly chaotic response that day. I mean, performing ineffective CPR on a soft mattress, panicking, scrambling to hide vials, all of that looks way more like gross, desperate medical incompetence and criminal negligence than a cold, calculated professional hit. Now, even after his passing, the controversies definitely didn't rest. In 2019, the Leaving Neverland documentary premiered, bringing highly graphic new civil claims from Wade Robson and James Safechuck. These were men who had actually previously sworn under oath that Jackson never abused them. The Jackson estate has fiercely denied these new allegations, pointing right back to those prior testimonies and timeline inconsistencies. This battle is still being heavily litigated today, with a civil trial currently scheduled for 2026. The legacy remains deeply, deeply contested.
So, the crucial point here is how fast headlines can outrun the actual truth. Recently, Jackson's name appeared in the unsealed Epstein files, which obviously sparked a massive internet frenzy. But when we look at the objective documents, they reveal Jackson simply visited a Palm Beach house for about 30 seconds while house hunting back in 2003. When a victim was asked point-blank under oath if she massaged Jackson, she answered unequivocally, "I did not." He's not in the contact books, he's not on the flight logs, and there is absolutely zero allegation of wrongdoing against him in those files.
Moving past the rumors, we really have to look at the financial aftermath. $3.5 billion. That is the immense wealth generated by the Michael Jackson estate post-mortem. Through films, merchandise, Cirque du Soleil shows, and catalog sales, the estate completely wiped out the crushing $500 million debt that tormented Jackson's final days. Ironically, this made him Forbes' top-earning dead celebrity for years and completely secured his financial legacy.
Which leads us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves after exploring this explainer. Does the undeniable permanence of the music outlive the unresolvable mystery of the man? Michael Jackson was born in a tiny house in Indiana and died in a rented mansion in Los Angeles, leaving behind a legacy that is simultaneously brilliant, broken, and endlessly debated. The arguments about his life are going to continue forever, for sure, but the art he created, that remains completely untouched. Thank you for diving into this source material with me. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.